And I also want to say that I want people to use this opportunity to go out and vote on Wednesday. Whichever way they vote, getting people engaged, getting people voting, particularly young people, is really, really important. And I'm absolutely certain that this exercise that has happened here, and indeed has been going on in Switzerland for many, many years, I believe that direct democracy is the way forward for the West. We no longer trust our career politicians. We no longer trust people who go straight from university into research offices, become members of parliament at 27 years old, who look the same, think the same, support the same policies, marry each other's sisters. We've had enough of it. And we need a politics that reflects the way the people in a democracy feel. So I'm all for direct democracy, and I think what you're doing here is setting a very important precedent, I hope, for many other, what used to be democratic nations across the West. So more direct democracy must be a cry that comes out from Wednesday. Now, it's important, I think, given that I'm a foreigner, that I don't come along here and tell you how you should vote. It's not for me to tell you how you should vote. No, I'm very neutral on this European Union question. Well, look, it's very simple. If you think that most of the laws of your land should be proposed by an unelected bunch of old men based in the European Commission, then you're welcome to it. Vote yes, by all means. But if you vote no, that will have, I hope and believe, some real consequences. You see, it should have had consequences back in 2005. It should have done. Now, I remember that referendum very, very well. I was in Paris on the night of the French referendum when they said no to the European Constitution. And I was in Brussels on the night that you voted no to the EU Constitution. In fact, I was in the members' bar of the European Parliament when the vote came through with about 80 or 90 Eurosceptic MEPs and staff that worked in the Parliament. And we waited for the result, and up it came. 61% had said no. And I thought, well, it's simple. The French have killed the Constitution. The Dutch have now buried the Constitution. We have actually struck a blow against the centralization of Europe, against the direction of this whole project. For about 10 minutes, as the corks popped out of the bottles, I actually thought we changed the whole direction of this project. And I remember being very happy. And at that moment, 10 minutes on, a German socialist MEP called Joe Leinen, and Joe Leinen had been one of the co-authors of that constitution, and Joe Leinen was walking down past us, heading off, I guess, to do a press interview. And I walked over to him, as modestly as I could in the circumstances, and said, would you like to share a glass of champagne with us to celebrate this wonderful result that we'd had in the Netherlands tonight? And his eyes looked straight through me. And he said, and I've never forgotten it, and I never will, he said, you may have your little victory party tonight. We have 50 different ways to win. And it just, everything just drained out of me. That brief 10 minutes of elation, of thinking we changed this whole thing, drained out of me. And what did they do? Within a few weeks, they'd rebrand. Oh, they told us they'd get rid of the flag and the anthem, remember? Fancy what? They were lying, weren't they? They were lying. The flag's still there and the anthem's still there. They play that wretched anthem in the European Parliament. And they get upset when I turn my back on them. They said they'd do that, they didn't. They rebranded it as the Lisbon Treaty, and the former Italian Prime Minister D'Amato boasted He said the great thing about calling it the Lisbon Treaty and not the Constitution is we won't need to have referendums. How about that? How is that for sheer political cynicism? Well, of course, one country did have to have a referendum because it's in their constitution. And the Irish had a referendum, and guess how they voted? They voted no and were forced to vote again. And they'd done the same 15 years earlier over the Treaty of Nice, and indeed we'd seen the Danes back in 1992 rejecting the Maastricht Treaty and being told by the then German Chancellor that as a little country they'd got it wrong and they would have to vote again. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the real story of this European project. It is an idea that has been dreamed up by the elites. It is an idea that is backed by big banks, big business, and big politics. It is an unholy trinity who have decided how we should live our lives in the future. And the only way we are going to beat them is to stand up and revolt against the establishment and defeat them in referendum after referendum. Now, I hope I put across my position there in as neutral a terms as I possibly could. Because you wouldn't want somebody from overseas coming here telling you what to do, would you? So the opinion polls say that on a relatively healthy turnout, the opinion polls say there is going to be a no vote of similar proportions to the one that we saw in this country in 2005. I wonder whether your government will listen. I wonder whether the European Commission will listen. Well, you will all hope. You will all hope. Maybe for as long as 10 minutes, who's to say? 15. 50. Any advance on 15? I don't know. Don't be silly, 20 minutes, really. You've got to get a better quality of audience than this, Mr. Chairman, really. I suspect that they will ignore you, which is even more reason to vote no. Because if they do ignore you, all that happens is the argument moves on. And the argument that there's no point in going on voting for the same traditional parties who ignore your will, that will grow too. That will grow too. It has to. And I'm pleased to see that in this campaign, there are parties in this country on the right of politics and parties on the left of politics campaigning for a no vote. This question about whether we live as nation-state democracies, this question about whether we're the masters of our own destiny, this question about whether we are nation-states and free and independent. This is not about whether you are left or right. It's about right and wrong. That's what it's about. But there may just be, if of course there was to be a no vote, there may just be another knock-on consequence of perhaps even greater significance. If in the course of the next 3 months your vote is the hors d'oeuvre, then our vote is the main course. Our vote really is the main course. And too often over the years, the so-called liberal, who are actually highly illiberal, but never mind, the so-called liberal elite say to the Eurosceptics in my country, look, stop being so silly. Stop behaving like islanders. Stop being backward. Don't you understand that on the other side of the North Sea, everybody thinks that the European project is completely and utterly wonderful? I'm beginning to understand that. But that's what they say. And actually, the result of a no vote in this referendum will send a big message to the British electorate that we are not alone in thinking something has fundamentally gone wrong in the direction of the European Union and the freedom and self-government of our country. A no vote in this referendum. A referendum that they've done their best to ignore, apart from Mr. Juncker's little slip. They may have got him after lunch, I don't know. It's the one thing Juncker and I got in common, actually. We like lunch. They may have got him after, but you know, he admitted that it would be a disaster. There would be a disaster if there was a no vote here on Wednesday. Well, I find that tremendously exciting because I think this project is a disaster. I think this project is based on a whole series of untruths that have been told to us for decades. And the one referendum in which I can tell you that I am going to tell the electorate where I stand is the British referendum on June the 23rd. And I shall be buoyed up, I believe, on Wednesday night by the result that comes from this country. I believe in Brexit. I believe the United Kingdom should be an independent, self-governing democracy. I want us to trade with Europe. I want us to cooperate with Europe. I want us to be good next-door neighbours. I want us to be friends. I want us to have reciprocity. You know, we don't need a European Commission to have an Erasmus scheme, to have exchanges of students. We can agree where it suits us, common minimum business standards. There are many things that we can do. But I've believed in Brexit now for nearly a quarter of a century. And I decided back in 1993, as somebody who'd been in business before, that's right, I had a proper job, how about that? I had a proper job trading in base metals, copper, aluminium, lead, tin, zinc, and nickel. And I should have thought 90% of it was shipped through Rotterdam. So I've done my bit for your economy as well, all right? Well, it's true, nowhere else is any good, really. Rotterdam is actually very, very good at what it does. So I spent my years working in the commodities business, but I was so enraged by the direction my country was going in that I thought I had to get involved. So I first stood for election back in 1993, and to say that my views were considered to be fringe and extreme would be a mild understatement. And in my first election, I just managed to beat the leader, the late great leader of the official monster raving loony party. I just beat him and didn't quite come last. And I wondered through the 1990s and through the early noughties whether perhaps I was going to become the English patron saint of lost causes. Because simply people just didn't seem to care. But I kept on plugging away, and in the European elections of 2014, the party that I lead topped the polls and came first across the United Kingdom. It wasn't a bad job, was it really? It took a long time. And Brexit has now become so mainstream that 6 members of David Cameron's cabinet, he's pretty cheesed off, I got to tell you. 6 members of Cameron's cabinet have come for Brexit. 140 Conservative backbenchers are campaigning for Brexit. And there are increasingly now some voices from the Labour Party and the trade union movement. Even the Communist Party of Great Britain are campaigning for Brexit. I never thought I'd be on the same side as them, I have to tell you. I can't accurately predict what the result is going to be, but what I've heard and what I've seen from the establishment so far in this campaign is a whole host of fear and scare stories, telling us that if we're not part of this union, nobody will trade with us. Well, when I look on the streets of London, I see quite a lot of Audis, BMWs, Mercedes, and for those that will still admit to it, Volkswagens as well. And when I look in the pubs and the clubs and the restaurants of Britain, I see quite a lot of champagne and wine. And actually, the reason why, in economic terms, Brexit does work for my country is we now trade with all of you at a massive, massive deficit every single year. So we are the right country to have this referendum first. We're the one country where cold economic logic says we don't need to be in a European political project in order to buy and sell goods from each other. But I do think, even though I personally would wish the arguments for democracy to be at the fore, I suspect the issue that will decide whether the United Kingdom decides to stay or leave will be the issue of open borders, unlimited immigration, and an increasing security threat. And frankly, look around the world. There are 200 countries around the world that control their borders. 200 countries that if you want to go and settle there, you have to pass a series of tests. And generally what countries say is we want people who've got trades and skills. We want people without criminal records. We want people who are prepared to pay their own health insurance for the first few years they're in the country. And we want people not in unlimited numbers, but in sensible, limited numbers. And none of us can now do that as members of a European Union with a population of 508 million citizens, and 10 of those countries are former communist countries that are, that are far, far poorer than any of us are in the north of Europe. So getting back sensible immigration controls, I think, makes sense. And whilst you may be debating, or voting, I should say, on this Ukrainian deal, there's another potential enlargement that I think is even madder. Did someone say Turkey at the back there? 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. Isn't it amazing? So we have this crisis. Juncker sends out a message last year that the EU common asylum policy is coming into place. Chancellor Merkel then gave a speech last summer, which I think was the worst political misjudgment we've seen in Europe since 1945. And now Turkey is negotiating with the European Union. They're not doing badly, are they? So far, we've agreed to give them 6 billion euros. So far, for every one non-qualifying refugee that we send back to Turkey, they will send us someone that they think is a qualifying refugee. And from later on in this year, 77 million Turks will have visa-free access to the Schengen zone. Yeah, that means you guys. And in theory, they can only stay for 90 days. But in practice, large numbers will disappear or, of course, claim family reunion. And on top of that, Chancellor Merkel and the others have said they're going to fast-track Turkish membership of the European Union. Do you know something? We've just finished David Cameron's renegotiation of Britain's membership of the European Union. I wish he'd asked the Turks to negotiate for us, because they've done a spectacular deal. And I suspect the common sense of the British people will come through here. Given that the boss of Europol now says that as many as 5,000 jihadi fighters have come back into Europe, posing as migrants through the Greek islands, we face not just a threat to our wages of our average workers going down, not just a threat to our National Health Service, which simply, and I mean this genuinely, cannot cope with the increase in numbers in our country, not just a threat to our primary school system, where we simply haven't got enough places, not just a threat to our culture and our way of life, by having communities who, if they come in too fast the numbers, segregate and don't integrate with the rest of society. But frankly, I fear that through open borders, through the EU's common asylum policy, we actually face a threat to our civilization through our misplaced compassion. And I believe it's on those grounds And I believe it's on those grounds I think that the British people are going to vote for Brexit. I want to repeat what I said earlier. This is not about being anti-Europe. This is not about being anti-anybody. It's about being pro the people and the communities and the society and the culture in each and every one of our own unique, different, wonderful European countries. I want to live and work and go on holiday and do business in a Europe that is a fantastic Europe. This is the most fascinating continent on earth. You travel a relatively short distance, you find different cultures, different histories, different cheeses, different wines. You know, I mean, we should all be saying, vive la différence. We want a Europe of different independent sovereign nation states that work together as closely and as happily as possible. Provided European nations are democratic, they will never go to war with each other. And the analysis that came in the 1950s, that it was the existence of nation state that had led to war, and that therefore we should abolish nation state, was wrong. It was wrong. It's the absence of democracy in nation state that leads to war, not if they're democratic. So I have a vision for a Europe that in 10 years' time is back to being a Europe based very much more on the Europe we saw in Strasbourg in the late 1940s. The Council of Europe, where we as neighbours get together and discuss common issues. I mean, look, if you live in a street, you want to have a good local neighbourhood committee. You want together to deal with a problem of crime. You want together to deal with the problem of someone's playing loud music at 3 o'clock every morning. You know, you want to get on with your neighbours, because if you do, your life is better. But you're all different families living in that street. And the idea that what you should do is knock through all the walls and have a joint bank account, frankly, doesn't make any sense. I hope very much that you do the right thing in this country on Wednesday, whatever that may be. And if you do, I tell you what, you'll give me a hell of a lot of assistance for June the 23rd, when something epoch-shattering is going to happen. Thank you.